Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another Quran study. God willing, today we'll be reading from Surah 60, verse 5. Let's all seek refuge in God from sin, the rejected. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. 60, verse 5. Our Lord, let us not be oppressed by those who disbelieved, and forgive us. You are the Almighty, most wise. A good example has been set by them for those who seek God in the last day. As for those who turn away, God is in no need of them, most praiseworthy. God may change the animosity between you and them into love. God is omnipotent, God is forgiver, most merciful. Basic law regulating relations with unbelievers. God does not enjoin you from befriending those who do not fight you because of religion and do not evict you from your homes. You may befriend them and be equitable towards them. God loves the equitable. God enjoins you only from befriending those who fight you because of religion, evict you from your homes, and band together with others to banish you. You shall not befriend them. Those who befriend them are their transgressors. The verses that we just read regarding people who God says He may change the animosity between you and them into love is referring to people that you may consider enemies of God, and you're extending love and friendship to them, and God says don't do that, and then God gives us the example of Abraham and how he said that you will see nothing from us except animosity and hatred until you believe in God alone. And so in this next verses is talking about He may change the animosity between you and them into love by, say, then at some point, for based on some situation, just changing their belief, right? So for example, if I see someone with no hope for them as becoming submitter, and I see them as an enemy of God, it's possible, it could happen because I may not know 100% at that point, let's say, what is going to happen in every specific situation, right? I may base a decision based on my current assessment of a person in a situation, but maybe it's possible a few years down the line something drastically changes and this person gets a wake-up call, like almost as a miracle from God, and he may see it, but the thing is, that's up to God. So what I see from this is you shouldn't think, for example, like, yeah, there's always a possibility that someone can change even when someone has no hope, so then you can never not befriend anybody, but that's what God is not telling us that, right? God is saying, okay, based on your understanding of the person, if you see the person with having no hope and all of this, you should not befriend them. And Abraham sets a good example, and other believers set a good example, but God says He may change it into love, because if God wills them to be guided, they will be guided. And when they are guided, then you can change your demeanor towards them. Then you can be friends with them again if things somehow ended up being changed. But you can't say, no, I cannot do that because maybe 10 years down the line this person may become a submitter, because you don't know exact future. You may think the person's lost hope, but 10 years later, if he becomes a submitter, so that I can never treat him as a hypocrite if all the signs of hypocrisy appear to be there. God says, based on these verses, that if that happens, then God can change that animosity into love. He may change it, and it's up to God, because He's omnipotent. But then we are given very important verses from the Quran, which are also abused sometimes, is regarding the relations with unbelievers. So verse 8 and 9 are basic laws. Now, is a basic law, right? So what basic means is, it's the basis of of like a general rule, like a foundation on how, generally speaking, you're treating people. But that is not um, like a self-encapsulating thing, that this is the only part, only thing that matters literally, where you can just take these two verses, and in isolation, and just ignore the rest of the Quran. For example, God talks about not befriending people who are absorbed in the worldly life, or God talks about not befriending people who are hypocrites. But this verse is not talking about the hypocrites, right? But this is a general rule, which is why it says basic law regulating relations. So generally speaking, basically, you will not. This is a very general commandment, that you should not befriend people who fight you and evict you from your homes and stuff if they're not believers. You And they're doing these things, don't befriend them. But in contrast, if there are people that are not fighting you and doing this and these things, but they're unbelievers, you can befriend them. It's a general rule. But then obviously there are other details, that are in other verses of the Quran that we also have to, take into consideration, that are part of the Quran. And that's why it's called the basic law. So that, for example, did did you have hope for this person? Did this person have the whole message? Did they take the opposition? All these things matter. Which is why, like, as the message of the covenant explains it, he says, you will be the judge based on this person's circumstances. You would know, according to your own understanding of the situation, the circumstances. So it's not like a cookie cutter thing where you just take these two verses and apply, and then just say, okay, well, this person is not fighting me because of religion, or and evicting me from my home, so I can just befriend like every disbeliever and hypocrite who doesn't exactly fit in this category, right? But we know that's not the case. Verse 10, in case of war, O you who believe, when believing women abandon the enemy and ask for asylum with you, you shall test them. God is fully aware of their belief. Once you establish that they are believers, you shall not return them to the disbelievers. They are not lawful to remain married to them, nor shall the disbelievers be allowed to marry them. Give back the dowries that the disbelievers have paid. You commit no error by marrying them, so long as you pay them their due dowries. Do not keep disbelieving wives if they wish to join the enemy. You may ask them for the dowry you had paid, and they may ask for what they paid. This is God's rule. He rules among you. God is omniscient, most wise. If any of your wives join the enemy's camp and you are forced to fight, you shall force the enemy to compensate the men who lost their wives by giving them what they spent on their wives. You shall reverence God in whom you believe. O you prophet, when the believing women who abandon the disbelievers to seek asylum with you pledge to you that they will not set up any idols besides God, nor steal, nor commit adultery, nor kill their children, nor fabricate any falsehood, nor disobey your righteous orders, you shall accept their pledge and pray to God to forgive them. God is forgiver, most merciful. O you who believe, do not befriend people with whom God is angry and who are hopelessly stuck in disbelief. They're just as hopeless as disbelievers who are already in the graves. So we read in verse 10, God is talking about, as a subtitle illustrates, that this is in case of war, when the women abandon the enemy and ask for asylum with you. You can't take their word for it, because this could be a trick. For example, somebody could, they could be sending, for example, spies, or things like that, to infiltrate into your camp and get all your secrets, or influence your battle plans and all that stuff. And so you can't just keep a blind eye and blindly accept those people. You have to test them. And once you know that that's the case, then they're not lawful to remain married to them, and then you have to. And if your wife is a disbeliever, I mean, you can give back the dowry that you paid, and let them join the disbelievers if they want to join the disbelievers. And then if they if they come and God says don't return them to the disbelievers. Obviously, in that situation, this is more like a death sentence for them. If you return them, and then God says they're not lawful to remain married to them, nor shall the disbelievers be allowed to marry them. And so disbelievers obviously also are not even allowed at that time, and they're not lawful to remain married to them, people, because these people are disbelievers. So enemies of God, right? So you cannot be married to enemies of God, which is another important thing to consider. But this is specifically talking about in case of war, and God says to not keep the disbelieving wives if they wish to join, right? You may ask them for the dowry you paid, and they may ask you for what they paid. This is God's rule, pretty self-explanatory here. And then God says, if any of your wives join the enemy's camp and you're forced to fight, you shall force the enemy to compensate the men who lost their wives by giving them what they spent on their wives. You shall reverence God in whom you believe. So we see, like, this is important, right? Because, when you have a spouse, you and you have spent a lot. For example, you have given them dowry, and you have given a lot of things, and now that the war happened and they left you, these people may have lost a lot of material possessions as a result of that. Financial, that would be a case of financial loss. So they have to, and so in those situations, like the believers are being forced to fight, and so that you can force the enemy to compensate, because they're supposed to compensate, as it says God's law is that if war happens and the disbeliever join the disbelievers and the believers join the believers, just return everything, try to bring the situation back to before the marriage happened from both sides, right? So this is the law, and so if they don't want to abide by it, God says, and the fighting is already going on, you have to force them to pay. And then obviously then also once you realize that they're believers, and then they make this pledge, this promise that they will not worship idols and not steal, not commit like adultery or prostitution or killing their children or anything like that, nor fabricating falsehood or disobey the prophet. Obviously this is talking about the prophet, so specifically applying to the time of the prophet here. So God says you shall accept their pledge at that point. Like, you can't, after all of this, at this point, be suspicious and say, no, well, this may be a trick. They're trying to deceive us or something, so you have to accept that. And then also, as I was saying about verse 8 and 9, people talk about verse 8 and 9 sometimes and not mention verse 13, for example, which is very related to this. And so people, misusing or abusing the verses of the Quran, is an abuse of the scripture, So when we share verses of the Quran to make a point or something, and it's important to be careful and considerate on what we're conveying, whether what we're conveying is accurate, or are we misusing like certain verses. For example, in traditional Muslims, for example, when they want to promote violence, they will talk about, you fight them and strike their hands and feet, but they're not talking about only in self-defense, for example. And many verses talk about fighting back, in response. And so this is a way of when people choose verses in isolation and not choose other verses. A lot of times you will come across people who will use 60 verse 8 and 9 to, for example, want to befriend hypocrites, right? God says you should not befriend the hypocrites. Now, a hypocrite is not going to fight you necessarily because of religion or evict you from your homes or band together with others, at least not while they're pretending to be a hypocrite. Well, I mean, when they're pretending to be a believer and they're a hypocrite, and not all of the hypocrites are going to be that way, right? They sit among the believers and, then spread their poisonous lies. You think you're your brothers and sisters. So all of these are things that have to be remembered when addressing a situation about regulating your relations with the people who are not, believers. And so being hopelessly stuck in disbelief is one of them. And this is the verse based on which the Messenger of the Covenant talks about, befriending people, or talks about, for example, rather disowning people, or abandoning them, if you have no hope for them, right? Until you have hope for them, you have to treat them in the nicest possible way, because if there's hope for them, they can be better submitters than me and you one day. So best possible manner has to be remembered, and those people obviously you could befriend also, if unless you find out that they're hopelessly stuck in that disbelief that you don't think that there's any hope for them, then you shouldn't befriend them, right? Then you should run for your life. So this verse is talking about that. God willing, I'll continue reading 61, Surah 61, the column Al-Suf. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Glorifying God as everything in the heavens and everything on earth. He is the Almighty, most wise. O you who believe, why do you say what you do not do? Most abominable in the sight of God is that you say what you do not do. God loves those who fight in his cause united in one column, like the bricks in one wall. Recall that Moses said to his people, O my people, why do you hurt me, even though you know I am God's messenger to you? When they deviated, God diverted their hearts, for God does not guide the wicked people. So, as we can see, the title of this surah is a column, a suf, but I think these verses, the column itself is not really mentioned here. Also, these verses are talking about why people say what they do not do, not people not keeping their word. And so verse 4 talks about the believers being united in one column, like the bricks in one wall. So verse 3 specifically, or 2 and 3, talking about people who say what they do not do, is important because first, believers should keep their word. One, two, another way of looking at it is that we should not be hypocritical. For example, like I can't tell someone to remember God or do their contact prayers if I'm not doing them myself, so I'm saying something, but I'm not doing it myself. That's one way of looking at it. But also the other way of looking at it is you are not keeping your word. You say that you're going to do something, but you don't end up doing that. And then God says, most abominable in the sight of God is you say what you do not do. And then talking about the column, God says the believers should fight in God's cause united in one column, like the bricks in one wall. So we see that this is in itself is a very good allegory of how united we should be, right? Like if you think about the bricks, I mean, this is a beautiful example because a brick on its own, it does not have enough strength or power to do anything significant or achieve anything significant. Sorry, but if you put all the bricks together and you gel them together using concrete or cement or whatever, um, once they are together, they form a barrier that you can use it to build a wall, a castle, the most powerful structure that you can imagine. You can build just by putting things together one by one. Bricks together, and then you see that the bricks uh, are united. Like there's no hole in them. Imagine if you build a house with all these bricks, and in the middle there's a hole, big hole, where the bricks are missing. So that shows like disunity in the sense they're not closely tied to each other, and so as long as that happens, obviously, they could there could be infiltration at that point, and someone could come in and rob you or something. For example, it's a house or something. So, but they join their forces together, and all of them complement each other, and provide a big wall. And submitters should be like that when they fight in God's cause. God wants us to be united. In contrast, God doesn't want us to be divided and disputed, where we scatter in our strength, um, over whatever disputes it might happen that could be petty. And so the believers need to be united. Now it is important, when it to mention that when we talk about unity, unity does not come from, say, like when we talk about bricks, like unity does not come from being in one room and holding hands and stuff. I mean, unity comes from uniting in a greater sense of your purpose, uniting in your purpose, your goal, your beliefs, first, and then I mean, you can do things together, right? But it's not like you believe that, for example, circumcision is part of religion, or you believe that insurance is not prohibited, or anything like that, or you have created your own version of submission, and then someone comes and uses this verse to say, no, God says we should be united, so we should just be together no matter what you believe. And I throw out these extreme ideas because these are ideas that you will come across, as you go along. Like you'll see people, use verses to, suggest that, idea. But unity. God says the believers are united. This is a characteristic of the believers. So they're already united. God reconciles their hearts, and God makes them brothers in faith. And so, even if God says you spent all the money on earth, you could not reconcile their hearts, but only God can do that. Verse 5 says, recall that Moses said to his people, O my people, why do you hurt me even though you know I am God's messenger to you? When they deviated, God diverted their hearts, for God does not guide the wicked people. And so why is this verse mentioned here in this context? I think it's very important because we know what the people of Moses told him. I mean, imagine, right now we have the children of Israel that are so aggressive and mean-hearted, most of them. And when it comes to land, they have no problem, taking over, other people's land, fighting them, killing them. But here God talks about these people that were with Moses, that when it was time to fight, and Moses was among them, and he asked them to fight, they set the worst example, and they told the prophet of God that you and your God, and go and fight. We're staying right here. And we know that God allowed them to part company with such people. Uh, and so, even though we know, yeah, God talks about unity, but in that case, they had to part company, and God, those people deserve to be away from the believers, and they deserve to suffer and not have a share in the victory and the blessings that God gave to Moses and those people who were with him. At the same time, they were not united with them. But it was the disunity on part of those people to decide to not join the believers, right, in doing this. And that's when they prayed that, let's part company with the wicked people, because because they had decided that they would want to be united, right, in fighting God, right. So unity does not mean that, yeah, you come with us no matter what, even if you don't want to fight, yeah, just come with us, like, just be our buddies. No, you have to come together and be united with us in our purpose and fight with us in the cause of God, right. That's what is the commandment here. And these people instead decided to turn their backs when they were in difficult situation and told them, you go and you fight, I don't care, you know and then they got the consequences they got in return. Verse 6, messenger after Jesus. Recall that Jesus, son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, I am God's messenger to you, confirming the Torah and bringing good news of a messenger to come after me, whose name will be even more praised, Ahmad. Then when he showed them the clear proofs, they said, this is profound magic. Who's more evil than one who fabricates lies about God? And he's being invited to submission. God does not guide the evil people. They wish to put out God's light with their mouths, but God insists upon perfecting his light in spite of the disbelievers. So, verse 6 talks about messenger after Jesus. So it says, recall that Jesus said, I am God's messenger to you, confirming the Torah and bringing good news of a messenger to come after me, whose name will be even more praised. So this is clearly referring to a messenger coming after Muhammad. Coming after Jesus. And so most likely that was, as it says in this was most likely, I believe, talking about Muhammad, and then it says later about the messenger of the covenant after that. So then when he showed them the clear proofs, they responded by saying that this was magic. So they decided to disbelieve in the truth, and they decided to fabricate lies, like say, no messenger was going to come after, etc., and other lies that they made up. And God says, the people who fabricate lies about God, they're the most evil people on earth, right? So this is wrong. When someone attributes a lie to God, that is the most evil thing someone can do. You could do it unknowingly or knowingly. That's one thing, but for example, if someone has lied about God and then another person repeated that lie, both those people are fabricating lies about God. You can't say, well, when this actually happened, there was a person who was saying some certain lies about God, and those lies were being copied by other people too. And then I had shared a verse about it, and this one hypocrite jumped in, and she said, "Oh, why are you being so dramatic? Oh, stop trying to dramatize this." And later found out that this person was like a lesbian submitter. Imagine, and and so this hypocrite, And he said, no, no, nobody's fabricating. He's like, this was already being said, so this person did not fabricate that. I think it was related to circumcision, if I'm not mistaken. But it was way early, so this just reminded me of that. But yeah, a person who says falsehood about God, doesn't have to be the first person to come up with that lie. But it's a person, you're fabricating a lie. If you're saying something about me that I didn't say, it's a fabrication. And a person who's saying it, he's fabricating. He's lying. He's fabricating a lie. Doesn't mean he has to be the first person to, come up with it and put his patent on it or something. And then, so God says these are the most evil people. Why? Because attributing a lie to someone is wrong in the first place, but you attributing a lie to God is worse, because you're doing something against God, who's the Lord of the universes. But then also, in return, other people are going to repeat that lie, and all these people are going to be doomed to hell. So, Hitler is not the most evil person on earth. Or funny, because we're talking about the followers of Moses, but Hitler is not the most evil person, or a serial killer is not the most evil person, but the most evil person is one, according to the Quran, who fabricates lies about God while he's being invited to the truth. So that's on top of that, and he's being invited to submission. So a person is fabricating a lie to God, bad enough, really, really bad, a most evil person. But then on top of that, some of these people are also being invited to the truth. So it's one thing that you could be unknowingly lying and saying it, but once you're corrected, now you're even worse, because you're still insisting on your lie while you're being presented with the truth. And you're actively just opposing God at this point with full information at that point, right? You cannot claim innocence even. You cannot claim innocence to begin with, but then now you can definitely not claim any innocence. But you have to be really evil to not see the truth, because God says he guides the believers, and so if a situation like that happens, a believer will readily see his mistake, whatever that mistake might be, and come to the right conclusion. As soon as they find out, they repent immediately. But a person who's evil is going to insist on the fabrication while he's being invited. Like, for example, all the false messengers, and you even debate with them and tell them that you have to have proof and all this stuff, and they still, decide to, promote evil. And so those people are then, worse than, other liars, who lied about God, right? So there's levels on that also, right? So the most horrendous one, as the Messenger of the Covenant explains, is then one where a person says he's a messenger of God, while no such inspiration was given to him. Says, I have received inspiration from God, when no such inspiration was given to him. And they're also described as the most evil people, right? But they're more evil than someone who just says, like meat is prohibited, or cake is prohibited, or something like that, or sugar is prohibited, for lack of a better example. So God says they wish to put out God's light. What's wrong with me? They wish to put out God's light with their mouths, but God insists upon perfecting his light in spite of the disbelievers. So the disbelievers will continue to spread misinformation and continue to mislead people with full knowledge, but God says he insists upon perfecting his light in spite of the disbelievers. And so then we have the great prophecy, right? Which, as the subtitle suggests, then it says in verse 9, he has sent his messenger with the guidance and the true religion, and will make it dominate all religions in spite of the idol worshippers. And there's a footnote here. It says the specific name of this messenger is spelled out mathematically, Appendix 2. And then if you go to Appendix 2, This is referring to God's messenger of the covenant, who's Dr. Rashad Khalifa, who was sent as a messenger of God. And even though people tried to put out this light with their mouths, as it says in verse 8, God insisted upon perfecting His light. And even though they tried everything they could in their power, and even though they did assassinate him, he was martyred. He still lived on, and the message still lived on, and the message is still flourishing as God has planned. Everything went in accordance with God's plan, and His prophecy is mentioned here, which is that it's gonna make this true religion dominate all other religions. And we know that this generation, based on the mathematical miracle, is going to be the one in which is going to see this promised victory very soon. And we'll see people from all over the world, accepting submission in throngs, and submission will prevail very, very soon, God willing. This is God's promise. And the messenger of the covenant has elaborated on it further in other places, and in one of the submerged perspectives also, saying that this is God's promise, and it's going to happen in 50 years or less. And it's almost time that that time period is almost coming to an end. And with the smoke coming, obviously we know that all the signs are there in place for this thing to just blow up and take the literally blow up, no pun intended, and take the world by surprise. The best deal, verse 10. O you who believe, let me inform you of a trade that will save you from painful retribution. Believe in God and His messenger, and strive in the cause of God with your money and your lives. This is the best deal for you if you only knew. In return, He forgives your sins and admits you into gardens with flowing streams, with beautiful mansions in the gardens of Eden. This is the greatest triumph. Additionally, you get something you truly love: support from God and guaranteed victory. Give good news to the believers. O you who believe, be God's supporters like the disciples of Jesus, son of Mary. When He said to them, "Who are my supporters towards God?" they said, "We are God's supporters." Thus a group from the children of Israel believed, and another group disbelieved. We helped those who believed against their enemy until they won. So, subhanAllah, these are beautiful verses. As the subtitle says, it's the best deal. And we know that the return on investment on this is greater than anything you have ever seen in this world. It's everlasting, eternal, right? And it's more real than any wealth that we can ever accumulate in this world. And everyone has an equal opportunity to get to this. You don't have to be born in a rich family or be a genius or anything like that. You just have to be a good submitter, follow God's laws, and be steadfast and pass all your tests, and you can get this deal, provided that you do what God tells you to do. It's achievable. But of course, easier said than done. That's the human ignorance. But obviously, there's details that we need to be aware of, which is why it's such a good deal. It's a deal where the return is great, right? But it's not an easy deal. Of course, it's a difficult. There are challenges to overcome in this deal. But if you win, it's a big deal. It's a great triumph. It's a great victory. A truly amazing. Words cannot explain or do justice to what God is saying in terms of what that victory is going to be like. God just tells us that it's better than what you can ever imagine, and which in itself tells us a lot. And anything that saves you from the painful retribution in hell is great. Even if you just barely miss hell, that in itself is a great, great achievement, provided how far we went into, going to hell halfway, minimum for any one of us. We're already there, given that we have these two options. We could go here or there, so we're halfway. um, and so it's a great deal. And when God talks about He forgiving your sins and giving you gardens with flowing streams, I mean, this is an incredible opportunity for us that we can never thank God enough for. The um, angels, that are people who always glorified God, are so close to God. Even the angels suggested that we should be condemned to hell just for not siding with God, absolute authority at the time. But God decided to give us this chance because He knew that some of us needed to be saved. So we have this opportunity from God to be forgiven, even after we refused to come down as animals or trees, and we refused to repent when the opportunity was given, and just submit at that point. So we are allowed to have this opportunity. So anyone who gets these things, obviously, it's a huge, huge victory for them. God says that you'll get all this stuff, you'll get the redemption, and as a bonus, additionally, you get guaranteed support and victory. Like in this world, you get perfect health, wealth, and happiness. But we're not in this path to get perfect health, wealth, and happiness. We're in this path because we worship God alone, because we know that this is our only means to salvation, because we know that He is the only Lord and Master, and we have to worship Him for that reason. Otherwise, we're going to be doomed, and we're doing this because we love God, because He is the Lord of the heavens and the earth. He is the only one who's the most praiseworthy, I mean, we're not doing it for some benefit, in other words, right? We do it because God is truly awesome. And we, proclaim that, and we do that without anything, wanting anything in return. But God still, in return, forgives us our sins, and additionally, we get support, which we truly love, and victory from God that is guaranteed. And when God guarantees something, that God never breaks His promise. And that's why it's so important for us to be reminded and have that full faith, like when sometimes, our beliefs may get shaky, like Satan wants to put doubt, you start to get weak. To remember that, this is a guaranteed promise from God that, He will make the believers victorious, not in this world, not just in the hereafter, but also in this world. This is His promise. But there are people who are just running after perfect happiness, and they got it wrong for sure, and we know that they're misled by this. But we know as submitters, this is just an added bonus for us, but we're doing it for the sincere love of God and for the reverence of God, and everything else will just be given as a gift, as a reward, because God says He's the most appreciative, and He's the most faithful, and God never breaks His promise. There's so many great attributes of God, but these are among them. And then we are being reminded in verse 14 to provide an example like the disciples of Jesus. We have, for example, the example of the people of Moses, that when Moses asked his people that to fight, they said, "No, you go and you fight. We're staying right here." But with example of the disciples of Jesus, when He said, "Who are my supporters towards God?" they said, "We are God's supporters." And so they readily joined Him and supported Him in His mission. And them being, despite being so few, God actually supported Him with these people and then these disciples. and and God says, thus a group of from the children of Israel believed, and another group disbelieved. And then God says He helped those who believed against their enemy until they won. So God made the believers, victorious, and we know that even though they tortured His empty, soulless body, Jesus, as a messenger, was a complete winner, and He went straight to heaven. After giving the message, like, very, very swiftly. As we know, and so this is God's promise for every believer. And we have to be like that, even though in our situation, for example, the messenger of the covenant is no longer with us, but we still have the message, we still have the videos, audios, the text of the Quran, all the teachings we have. So he doesn't have to be alive for us, for him to be there. In order for us to support God, we could support God now, because the message itself is perpetual. The miracle itself is perpetual. We have everything that is left for us by God, from His messenger. Uh, and so, we can be like that. God, and God is telling us to be like that. God willing, I will continue just reading the next verse, and then we'll open the room for a house for comments or questions. Glorifying 62 Friday Al Juma, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Glorifying God as everything in the heavens and the earth, the King, the most sacred, the Almighty, the most wise. So everything in the heavens and the earth, even a rock, mountain, trees, birds, everything, even an atom in subatomic particles, everything you see in this universe, even the subatomic particles, if you peek further into it, they are smaller particles that you will find, and so all of these are following God's law, a certain pattern, and there's a certain rhythm that they're all oscillating with, and all of this stuff is very beautiful, and they're all glorifying God in doing that, even though we may not understand their glorification. They're all examples of God's glory, and they're glorifying God actively by doing so. So with this, God willing, I will end. And if you guys have any comments or questions at this point relating to the verses we read, please feel free. Thank you.
Subhanallah. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, mashallah.
MashaAllah, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Mashallah.
Brother, I had a question about verse 8. Dear God says that enjoin God does not enjoin you from befriending those who do not fight you because of religion and do not evict you from your homes. You may befriend them and be equitable towards them. God loves the equitable. Um, so, um, does this mean that even if they have received the message and they don't accept it, even for a very long time, and you know um, they will most probably go to Jahannam. They don't deserve. You can see that they don't deserve heaven. Can you still befriend them? Because like we know, of course, that only enemies of God are going to hell, right? So, and if we come to a conclusion that these people are enemies of God, so does this verse count until we come to that conclusion?
So, I think can you go on the first part? What your question? First part about your question. Sorry, it was I kind of
Oh,
missed the first part.
okay. So in verse chapter 60, verse 8, it says, God does not enjoin you
Mm-hmm.
from befriending those who do not fight you because of religion and do not evict you from your homes. You may befriend them and be equitable towards them. God loves the equitable. So, okay, my question is, these people who are not fighting with us because of religion, right? They are not our enemies. They don't fight us for it. And God tells us that we can befriend them, right? But when these people who are not fighting us receive the message and they insist on not believing in it, even after like a few years, maybe 5 years or 10 years, and we come to a conclusion that these people who do not fight us are destined to hell, and we can clearly say, okay, they are never going to believe. And when we come to this conclusion, and we know that the message also says this, it says only enemies of God are going to hell. So this means these people whom we are befriending are. Um, so we come to a conclusion that they are enemies of God. Does this mean that this verse counts until that moment that you come to that conclusion, or
When
can
you
you
say
still
this
befriend
verse,
them?
this means that this verse counts until we come to the conclusion. I don't get that part. Like, what do you mean?
Okay,
Um,
so like, where is there a limit? Is there a place where you can say, okay, I am not going to be befriend you anymore because, even after 10 years, you still don't accept the message. And I came to a conclusion that they are destined to hell. So, and I know only God's enemies are destined to hell. And so we cannot befriend God's enemies, right? Like, so befriend them until, because like there is a possibility that they will accept the message, right? If they are not fighting you, if they are not,
well, so I
right?
mean, we know the this is a general statement, right? So this is not an all-inclusive verse. So generally speaking, like it talks about 8 and 9 is referring to people like your neighbors, your coworkers, people like you, or that will come across that you will come across and interact with on a daily basis may not be your enemies in religion, but they will still be, disbelievers, and you can befriend those people. But then you have other people that will be in religious, uh, on religious basis, they will be your enemies.
In your religious circle. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So those
But
ones
okay,
that you
okay.
cannot befriend.
Okay, I get that. But what about, like, let's say I have a friend whom I know for 10 years, and 8 years ago I told him about the message, I gave him the message, and like there are still moments when we talk about religion and I'm giving the message. So, but at a point, I come to a conclusion that he will never going to believe.
Hmm.
He's not going
But I
to
mean,
accept
the
the
thing, yeah,
message.
yeah. So I mean, there's lots of people like that, right? But the thing
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
when Like you may have shared the message with maybe 50, 60 people, let's say, in your circle, and but the thing is, you may have talked about it once or twice, but then, I mean, there are several factors in this, right? Let's say, like, what happens in those years, like, that made you decide that this person is hopeless, like this person didn't show any interest, or was that this person took the side of the opposition. I mean, for example, like, you give the message to someone, you talk about the message a few times, they don't really react to it, and maybe 10 years pass. That doesn't mean that you're hopeless now because 10 years have passed. Like, that doesn't end your hope, or shouldn't end your hope. But your hope will end based on your full understanding of the situation about that person. Like, when you find out, let's say, that this person is really an atheist, or like a
Or
Mohammedan, or something,
mocking, and
or
the telling
mocking, or
about religion
something,
things.
which should indicate to you actively, like, no hope for this guy. Like, Abraham's example is a good example, right? But they all fall in that category of fighting, right? But then let's say this friend you're talking about, 15 years later, he comes out and says, Jaffer, like, I did a lot of research on your religion and this, and like, I don't believe this and I don't believe that. You know, he may not be fighting you actively, like in religion, like trying to evict you from your home, or deport you from your country, or anything like that, or your house. But, this person is an enemy of God because he's a disbeliever, and you've just concluded, based on his response, that he's not going to accept the message. So those are two different things, right? Just by your lack of knowledge about someone, accepting or not accepting, uh, is important. Like, what made you decide that, 10 years later, that there's no hope for this person, right? Did you see, for example, this person marry a hardcore atheist, or whatever? Like, there has to be, like, some logic behind your decision, right? Hopefully, in every one of these cases, right? Because, because there's no limit, right? In that sense, like, someone can accept the message in 10 years, someone can accept it in 20 years, someone may accept it after 30 years. But just by
Yeah,
the time itself, we can't make a decision, or I can't make a decision, just because this person didn't say anything. But let's say, you see indications, like, say, you every time you start to talk about it within that time frame, like, the person gets upset, or the person just get agitated, or wants to try to change the subject. I mean, those are some kind of things, that cues that you can pick on, for example, right? But just let's say 10 years passed and this person didn't tell you, hey, I became a submitter, or this religion is awesome. I can't make that call based on that, right? I hope I answered your question.
yeah, and brother, mashallah, thank you. And actually, on 13, it says, "O you who believe, do not befriend people with whom God is angry, and who are hopelessly stuck in disbelief. They are
Mm-hmm.
just hopeless as the disbelievers who are already in the graves." Yeah, so I get it. Like, you definitely need to come a strong conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if there is still hope for them,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, like,
I see that.
if you don't talk about it, you're not gonna know if there's hope or not. Let's say, so there has to be something happening, that tells you these things, right? Like,
Yeah,
for
and most of the
example,
time people are not really interested, but
yeah,
okay, yeah.
but we don't know exactly what's the situation in those people, right? I mean, yeah, they're not interested now, but we don't know if they'll be interested later. In that sense, right? We like there's
Yeah.
hope, right? Like, their mother could die, or dog could get sick, and they can turn to God, or someone may have, like, something crucial in their life, and maybe someone's not having a child, and all of a sudden they started looking into God, or someone get diagnosed with some disease, that they want to get out of, horrible disease, and they're about to end their life. Their life is about to end now. They start thinking about God. I mean, these are all the different times when someone may start thinking about God, and many things can happen, right? But a person, you gave the message to back in, your old days, and he hasn't changed in 20 years. In itself, I mean, it's not enough, in my opinion, to drive that conclusion. I mean, if he contacts me 20 years later, I mean, I'd still treat him as a potential submitter.
Yeah, or else you can also lose that person, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, if let's say I'm having on and off discussions with him, and I see for a fact that he's showing positive. I mean, like he's really showing those signs. Then that's a different story. Like, yeah. I mean, I could be having discussion with a person for 3 days, and depending on the discussion, I can, drive a conclusion very quickly, whether there's hope for him or not. Even, well, I mean, 3 days still won't be enough, but I mean, a short interaction, I would say, like, can really help you come to that conclusion, as long as the interaction itself is giving you, data.
Yeah, mashallah.
Yeah.
MashaAllah, like the example with Abraham's father, how quick it was.
Mm-hmm.
He right away he was in
Yeah.
opposition.
With the message of the covenant, his father, he gave him the message for just 4 months. Right after 4 months, he came to that conclusion because he wanted to get him killed. So it wasn't difficult to make that
Right.
come to that conclusion at that point. Same with Abraham too.
Yeah.
His father, he wanted his son to be killed. He told him he'd kill him, which is worse. So he gave a very, in a very strong clue that there's no hope for him.
Yeah, but I had just listened to that audio too. Like
Uh-huh.
I know that he had disowned his father, but I guess like I probably like when I was hearing it the first time, I
Uh-huh.
missed that part.
Uh-huh.
But I heard it recently, and he said that. I was like, oh wow,
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, we need to. This is a good time actually to remember that we need to also release those videos and audios, like on these other platforms for people to access. Not just on YouTube, like Spotify and iTunes and all these other places. For people to come across the message. Just like we have the Submitters album. The Messengers videos and audios, I mean, the content of it.
Mashallah. We also have your
Sorry, what was that?
I said we also have the submission at
Yeah, the
YouTube
submission app, yeah, we
submission.
do, mashallah. But
Mm,
but outside of that, we should also put these things out as like
yeah.
spoken word.
All right. Can you even put it like in? You probably can't put it like in Apple Music or nothing like that,
No,
huh?
you can, you can.
Like, you can the
Yeah,
audios.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Be right back. Yeah, mashallah, brother Abdullah commented also, and he says verses 8 and 9 show that we need to look at the Quran as a whole, not just one verse. Yeah, yeah. I've often, seen people abuse it. Especially people who just want to join the hypocrites.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these also like there's probably a lot of them like false messengers. Like they take these verses, like
Mm-hmm.
certain verses, and
Mm-hmm.
fabricate lies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Also, brother, like you were explaining how the messengers, how they get how they're victorious. Like you're talking about how Jesus' body was being tortured and all these bad things, and you like here in the Bible, they make it seem like it's so bad, he suffered so much, but like you were explaining, like we know that the messengers and the people that followed the messengers, the people that followed the message, that submitted to God alone, are the victorious, and um, yeah, so it's good how you pointed that out. Because if you look at it, like in the Bible, they have like the stories and stuff like that. They make it seem um, like try to make it seem bad, like that he suffered so much, and you know, but we know that God grants victory to the messengers and the people that follow the messengers that submit to God alone. Also, brother, you were saying that even though the messenger is not with us, um, you're saying we could be among those people. The Quran says that the only job for the messenger is to deliver the message. So now, we have the message, and like you said, everything is perpetual and, everything continues, like the message is out there, the videos are out there, the audio's out there, and, we have, stories, and, like the audios, the audios, and that we could put it in our lives now, like so many helpful situations, that we hear in the audios that help us now, in our
Mm-hmm.
lives and what we go through.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, we could be among those people. You know, like the Quran says, you know, the job of the messenger is to deliver the message. You know, subhanallah.
Mm. All right. So, are there any other comments or questions from anyone? Any off-topic questions? Anyone? Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to just mention about this thing we were talking earlier about the sugars, right? So I think it is important to understand like what God is saying. Like when God says, you know, eat everything that is lawful and good. You know, things that God has made lawful for food consumption. You know, we're not talking about like dog poop and stuff, you know, but things that God has created for us, like crops and fruits, that God talks about them, right? I mean, God says He created for you grapes from which you make good provisions, and like fruits that God has created, like pomegranate, you know, honey. All of these things are that are sweet. So you cannot say that God God doesn't prohibit sugar, but sugar is bad, and God says eat everything that's lawful and good. So then that means don't eat sugar, right? That's the only conclusion. And so what you're doing, you're saying, yeah, I'm not saying it's haram, quote unquote, which as if it's another category, but I'm actually telling you not to eat something and prohibit it, right? So this is a religious it's a way of creating a religious prohibition, basically, where you don't have to necessarily say that something is haram, quote unquote. It's just a word, which means prohibited. But when you say that God says eat everything lawful and good, obviously God is not going to tell you to eat things that are bad, right? Bad things you shouldn't eat. So God prohibits you from, you can say in other words, God prohibits you from eating things that are bad for you. You don't have to say this is prohibited verbatim for something to be prohibited. But this is how we understand that when God says, the prophet, to him, he made a mistake and he said, you prohibited something on himself that God did not prohibit just to please his wives, and so based on this, we understand what God is telling us is eat and drink in moderation. This is God's system or God's recommendation. And so, for example, when this argument was presented, what I was saying earlier was it was implied with this article, with this message, that God says eat everything is lawful and good, and so I'm a nutritionist, and I believe that sugar is bad, and you should use there's so many artificial sweeteners, like why don't you use like stevia and monk fruit and stuff, which obviously has its own set of adverse effects as well, because if you look more into this sugar discussion, God has created our bodies in a certain way, and one of the things, that mechanisms that a body does is, it responds differently to taste of sugar, and when the sugar when it senses sugar, it expects calories to be there for it to do stuff with it, for whatever balance that God wants to create in your body, to put it in simpler terms. And so when it finds sweet but it doesn't find calories, it can get confusion. It can get in a confused state. Obviously, that's what at least the science is saying now. So that has its other effects, and there are finding other issues like gut problems and other issues. And obviously, people who are trying to promote these as products that they can sell will do studies or bogus studies or research to promote their thing. For example, the alcohol industry, will spend a lot of money to circulate research that shows, it's drinking alcohol, like one glass of wine, is good for your heart, for example, and stuff. Now we know it's like all a lie, and it's actually very bad for you. And so similarly with all these artificial sweeteners, sweeteners that were introduced early on, like which are still being used, can cause cancer and so many other illnesses. So we cannot just use those things and just repeat them without doing more research into it. But to categorically just say that sugar is bad, and so sugar is all bad, and like promoting these extreme diets that will only last for a certain period, they're not sustainable, because they make people, these are crash diets that make people completely go off sugar. Like for example, like a vegan diet or something, where you prohibit all meat, on yourself. Now the messenger of the covenant, how he gives the example of why these countries are poor, like he gives examples of countries like Pakistan and India, not India so much, I think he mentioned Pakistan, but he's talking about why the prohibition is bad in this case. Is like, he doesn't say because you necessarily just because you're saying something that is lawful and it's not. I mean, he also gives us an example, so he says, let's look at all the seafood that God has created, Now there's people that find stuff in seafood, that can cause issues, for example, right? And then But then you have these people that will prohibit that also religiously. But the example he says is that he says because it's unappreciative. He says because God created all these things for you, and now you say, you know what, I don't care, I don't want them. And he says that's unappreciative. So it doesn't matter if you say that it's quote unquote haram or not. The moment you have prohibited something completely, like on someone, on yourself in this case, and say, I'm never going to eat this thing anymore, I don't like this, I don't care, we shouldn't have that sort of mentality just because you think it's bad. And you think it's bad because obviously there's good aspects of it, right? Sugar itself, for example, is an essential part of a human diet, and our body functions, perform some of its most vital functions on sugar. So you can't say that sugar is bad. You can say you have to eat sugar in moderation. And people who prohibit it on themselves, obviously, will end up having, other, series of, adverse effects, right? So, but the part about unappreciativeness in this case also comes into play, where God has created all these nice things, including fruits and stuff, and then you end up prohibiting them, and so you don't have to necessarily say they're a prohibited category of foods by God, but having dietary prohibitions based on a non-religious opinion, and prohibiting on yourself. I mean, if it's not prohibited by God, obviously, it's wrong. So I think that's the part that I wanted to clarify, and I think it's important to address that, because if we don't address it, obviously it spreads, and then people think, yeah, it makes sense, and yeah, fat has a bad name. Brother Jaffa said, I'm reminded of that what the messenger said. He said these days fat has a bad name, but you can't have this vitamin without fat in milk. Yes, that is true. I believe you're talking about vitamin E. Yeah, same example, right? Yeah, so I think, so I mean, these things, that's why these things need to be discussed. And I think here I have a language barrier too, because I have to translate everything before I say it or before I read, So it's good, like, if you guys talk about it in the Turkish study, so God willing, people are on the same page, because even though I try to talk about it, I don't think that I was able to, give my message across as clearly as I wanted to. Inshallah. MashaAllah. Okay, thanks. All right, so are there any other comments or questions from anyone? I think Brother Khalid asked a question. He says, what is the status of night prayer? Salatul Tahajjud, as practiced by Muslims, anything from the Quran to support it? No, I mean, there's only 5 contact prayers. All these other prayers are, and including your Friday prayer, as a substitute on Fridays for noon prayer. So these are only prayers, and all these other prayers are from Satan. The Messenger of the Covenant, he explains how, even adding an extra unit in your prayer is idol worship, because a God other than God is telling you, let's say you decide to have 3 units instead of 2 units for dawn. This is, even though remembering God is great, but adding another extra rak'ah or unit to your prayer, there must be another God besides God who's telling you to do that, because God doesn't say anything. So, and this is a whole prayer on its own, right? So there's no such thing basically as tahajjud salat. All right.
Brother Suleman,
Yes.
I have a comment. I have a comment when you're talking about the food. So
Uh huh.
it's different, right? Like if like it's something that you like really don't enjoy, and like you're just like, oh, I don't want to have this, today. Is would that be like being an appreciative? Like if it's something your
I
taste
mean,
buds, like
you have choices. You can eat anything you like.
right, right.
Uh, that's
Yeah, but would it be unappreciative? Like if it's something particular, like like some people don't like milk, or some people like they don't have a taste for certain things. Like if you just avoid it, like would that make you like? Would that be that you're unappreciative in a way?
um. I think it's a very good question because, I mean, one can still say that this could be a kind of an appreciation if you just don't like if it's there's nothing wrong with it, but you just say, I don't like it, I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, you if it's I mean, some people say that for example, like you shouldn't say like, I hate, let's say like I hate bananas. You can say, well, I'd rather not have banana. Some people think that makes a difference, but
Right.
but I don't know. I mean, the thing is that God created all these good things for us, so we should be appreciative and eat from these good things, right? As God says in moderation. And so we need to have a balanced diet and do a moderation in terms of how we eat them, eat and drink moderately, let's say, and so some people don't like water, uh, but they
Mm-hmm.
should drink it, I mean, and they have to drink it, right? But I think unappreciativeness happens when you just completely prohibit it on yourself, like you would not care, like you say like, oh, I don't care if this bananas exist or not, I'm not gonna have, because I'm not
Right.
gonna have them
Right.
ever. Now I
Yeah.
can say that is a kind of an appreciation. But let's say
Yeah,
if
cause
I'm,
like me.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, brother. Yeah, I understand. Cause like milk, like even like growing up, I never really like drank it by itself. But it
Hmm.
doesn't mean like I can't drink it.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
could drink
also,
it.
yeah, also when it
Yeah,
comes to milk, like
and it's.
you have to see that. I mean, you were born and raised in the U.S., and most
Mm-hmm.
of the milk way it's processed here, commercially available, they kill
Mm-hmm.
the process goes through. I mean, it kills the taste of milk,
Mm-hmm.
natural milk. All the natural good bacteria that is found in the milk that is needed for you to be able to digest it and enjoy it and stuff is already dead. For most of these cheap processed milk. So
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to taste milk, like try to find an farm animal, and consume it directly fresh from the animal and see what milk tastes like, or go to one of these other countries and travel and try to find raw milk, or go to, I mean, at least go to Whole Foods and get like good organic raw milk, or any place that would actually sell raw milk, to
Okay, I
even try to
understand.
figure out what milk is supposed to taste like, because most of the milk actually does taste terrible, and
Mm.
because all the good bacteria and stuff gets killed in the process, because they want the shelf life of these things to be longer. It doesn't have all the essentials that it should have for it to go down and digest properly in our guts.
Mashallah, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also certain foods too, like like certain things. If you could like get a taste for them. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
situations where like I really never ate this before.
Mm-hmm.
But if you keep eating it, then you end up like having a taste for it. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is pretty good.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
think this
yeah.
is a good reminder. Like, I mean, God has created so many different things. And I mean, if you want to appreciate them, I mean, you can't appreciate something without taking it,
Mm.
right? I like, let's say, I come to learn that there is this particular fruit in the supermarket that I never ate. And so, like if I really want to be appreciative at that point, I'm not saying that not getting it is being unappreciative, but I'm saying like if really want to appreciate it, I would think like my attitude, general attitude should be like, okay, God has created all these amazing things. Like I want to taste them and see what they're like, and enjoy them and get the benefits. I mean, that's what a mindset would be, generally speaking, like for a person who wants to be appreciative. Like God says, eat from all the good things that are lawful, you know, that God has created, So you'd want to be open in that sense, right?
Mashallah,
Yeah.
brother.
Yeah, brother. Jaffer said, I don't like the taste of coriander. I can't help it. This doesn't make me ungrateful. Uh, coriander, you mean like parsley and cilantro? I mean, you don't, you're not, I mean, you're not supposed to eat it on its own. You know that, right? Is that what you're trying to do? Yeah, no, I mean, that's not a way to consume it. I mean, you could, but uh, I mean, there's many ways you can eat it. Yeah, I mean, I can say like I don't like the taste of raw meat, uh, but that's not what uh, it's supposed to be. I mean, like God created the meat. He created fire so you can cook it. He gave you spices, you can marinate it, and just just try things.
Brother Suleman, what about the fat of the pig? The fat of the pig is awful.
Yeah, fat of the
With
pig is
that.
lawful. Yeah,
Mm.
you can consume it. Many products, it's used for, and then also, coriander. Speaking of coriander, it does have beneficial effects. Also in itself, like I remember reading about it, like it has a calming effect or something. Also, you know, that's the one I remembered. Like these certain herbs that when you take them, uh, coriander specifically, it says it's a source of vitamin C, calcium, magnesium, potassium, and iron, and it also has antibacterial effects. It contains chemicals that lower blood pressure by causing blood vessels to dilate and work like a water pill. So I mean, all these things have so many benefits. That's why God created all these things for us. But I mean, there's also poisonous plants out there. Doesn't mean that everything God has created you have to eat it. We're talking about things that God has created for our consumption to eat. Products that we're supposed to eat. And he talks about, for example, fish. He says, soft meat and stuff, which many people don't like seafood too. And but he gives that example, like in certain countries, people prohibit it on themselves, and that's why he said like they're so poor, because God says prohibiting lawful stuff brings deprivation. Brother Khalid says, I need help to understand 89.3. What do you need help with? Can you clarify?
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
It's just what is meant by the chef and what uh,
89
old
two.
is the translation in English says by the even and the odd. There's a
Okay,
footnote. I tried to look up.
right, right. So if you look in the appendices, there is mention about the even and the odd. So when you know it talks about the odd numbered surahs and and even numbered surahs. For example, you can look at Appendix 1, I believe, or Appendix 24, actually, on a page, I believe it's 476 in the PDF or the printed version that we have. Look at like table 4, it talks about the odd numbered surahs, and then uh, all the mathematical parameters around it, and then it talks about the even numbered surahs also, I believe. There is a number 48 which is related to table 32. It says let us continue with the same group of items of surah, so of items 47 and 49, and it says surah, since surah 9 is an odd numbered surah, let us remove all the even numbered surahs from the list. Now we have odd numbered surahs with odd numbered verses, and then they talk about it and put it in a table, and this is table number 32, and you can see that it adds up to be 19 times 19, 361. If you add those numbers of verses, so that's 19 times 19. And there's a few others, you know. Uh, for example, it says there are three surahs whose numbers are odd, their numbers of verses are odd, and the number of verses consist of three digits. These are 9, 11, and 17, those same surahs. And if you just add the individual digits also, you know, of those surah numbers, they add up to be 19. And if you just add their numbers of verses, they add up to be 361, which is also 19 times 19, right? So subhanallah, it's amazing.
MashaAllah. So it refers to because this is God is God is swearing by. If you look at the chapter,
Mm-hmm.
by the dawn and the 10 nights, by the even and the odd. So
Mm-hmm.
by the night it as. So these are the things that God is like using to like emphasize,
Swear on, yeah.
swear on. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Which means that they must have a very powerful status and importance for us to comprehend
Well,
and understand.
there's also it talks about like the fact that you speak, right? So um, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something extraordinary in particular, even though it is. But it's just, you know, like for example, when God swears by, like when you say, you know, I swear by my mother, doesn't necessarily mean that your mother is a saint or anything. It just I mean, it's just that you're trying to make a point. In this case, like um, you know, like you have the 10 nights, just like you have the 10 nights, you know, in the same way. Um, I'm trying to find the verse, but I can't find it right now. But you know, it's almost implying like just like these things are facts, you know. In other words, this is also true, you know.
Yes, yes, thanks. This same verse, Muslims use it as they call for the night prayer. They call shefa. You pray 2 rakah, the witr is 1 rakah. So that's why I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
understand this.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was trying to see
Oh,
the
you mean
misconception
with
they
the
create.
odd and even thing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay, interesting.
Okay, mashallah. Thanks, brother.
All right. So I guess if there are no other comments or questions, God willing, we can conclude our study. So thank you all for joining us. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.